Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and we're back with another remaster class. This time we're talking about all the changes to Druid. Now, I have to state, this video is only the changes of Druid, and this only includes content that was remastered, which was what came from the core book and the advanced player's guide. So if it's not mentioned in this video, that means it was either unchanged or so little changed about it that it wasn't worth mentioning. I also want to state that Paizo did provide for me the player's score and GM score for review as one of their reviewers, but this is not sponsored content, so all thoughts and opinions here are my own. So let's go ahead and talk about Druid. So Druid did actually get a significant amount of changes, or at least it got a lot of extra feats in comparison, which I think is good. I think one of the reasons why many of the casters got a lot more feats was because casters, honestly, were very feat deprived. It was kind of a balancing factor early on that, marshals had more feats because casters had spells to choose from. And while I don't necessarily disagree with that kind of mentality, I will say that it did make leveling some classes feel a little bit more lackluster than others. And so I think they went through a lot of effort to increase the number of feats a lot of casters have. And overall, I think it's a good thing. Druid honestly getting some pretty decent buffs, and Druid being kind of one of the more iconic classes pulled from D&D did get a significant number of name changes as well. But before that, let's talk about the Anathema. So the Anathema did change, and now, as you can see here, let me go ahead and move my camera. So as you can see here, the Anathema is do not despoil natural places, consume more natural resources than you require to live comfortably, and do not teach the wild song to non-druids. And that is one of the changes is that now Druidic is changed to wild song. I'm going to mention that here in a moment, but first, talking about the Anathema, no longer is using metal like an anathemic thing to druids. So that being the case, you now can use metal armor and metal weapons. I think this is going to be rather polarizing for many people. Many people liked the idea of the druid kind of like eschewing all such kind of materials, and now they can use them, and some builds are going to change. Now, I think this makes a lot of sense considering with Rage of Elements, we've essentially added metal as an element. So that being the case, it wouldn't make sense for a class so focused on, elemental casting in general to kind of not use one of the elements in the world. So yeah, this is a pretty big buff, honestly. Now druids have access to better armor and better weapons, honestly, which is pretty cool. Something I really like. But let's talk about Wild Song. So Wild Song is Druidic, right? Wild Song is the new change from Druidic. Now, I understand a lot of the remaster purpose is to differentiate Pathfinder from D&D as much as possible with the OGL nonsense going on. And for the most part, I can get behind it. As many differences as possible is good. But the fact that Wild Song was one of those scene changes, on one hand, Wild Song is more elemental focused, I feel like, while Druidic is more like from the ideas of druids, Still, I don't know. This is a silly change. The fact that the druids don't speak a Druidic, but now Wild Song now seems silly to me. But that's just a small gripe on my end. I understand some of the reasons, don't get me wrong. It's just one of those things where it's just like Druidic was a thing. I don't know. Anyway, so we now have Wild Song. So if that bothers you, well, it kind of bothers me too. But if not, it does make sense thematically as well. All right, so now we're going to quickly move through the Druidic order changes. First, we're going to go to Leaf. Now, no longer do they have Goodberry, they use Cornucopia. It's literally the same thing, though Goodberry did get a change. Now, no longer do you need to use a berry to cast the spell. You now just produce a Cornucopia that produces some kind of, natural good that then can be eaten for HP and the like. So yeah, a very small change, I admit. Oh, also Leshy Familiar did change as well. So Leshy Familiar now just gives your Leshy either the fungus or plant trait. You get to pick either one, which I think is kind of cool. Other than that, the only order that really changed was the Wild Order, now called the Untamed Order. It changed its feat of Wild Form. Was it Wild Form, right? Wild Shape got changed to Untamed Form, and conversely, or in addition to that, Wild Morph got changed to Untamed Shift. Now, Wild Shape was a very much a coined phrase from D&D, so this is something I very much understand. And Untamed just, it makes sense. And plus, it's not really necessarily there is an animal order, for instance. So I think Untamed better represents the idea of wildness rather than saying wild form, because it was always kind of mixed with beasts ideas. In any regard, it's more or less the same, but the order is more or less the same, and all the orders are pretty much the same as well. They just, some got some name changes to, differentiate from D&D, which for the most part I approve. All right, another very interesting choice is Wild Empathy was changed to Voice of Nature. And Voice of Nature now gives you a choice whether you want to have animal empathy or plant empathy, and you get one of the two Druid feats which were added to the game. And it's pretty much as written on the tin. Animal empathy lets you talk to animals, plant empathy lets you talk to plants. So there's now a choice. I actually pretty much like this one in general. Before, it was only animal empathy. Essentially, you can only speak with animals, and then you had to pick up a feat later to get plants. Actually, one quite a bit later if you were in the leaf order. So now all druids can either talk to plants or talk to animals, which I think is great for a first level feat. I think there's a lot of ways this can be utilized, and just giving you more choices is honestly just a good thing. All right, so speaking on feats, let's go ahead and talk about feats. But before we get into the feats, I just want to remind you all that if you enjoy this content, please like it to let other people see it. And if you want to see more like it, subscribe, as no one else is doing as much of the remaster content as I am here on the channel. And as well, we are actually going to be getting into, over the next few days, the spell changes, which I know a lot of people have been very interested in. So if you want to be up to date on the newest changes to the remaster before it releases on the 15th, this is the channel to be on. We've also grown pretty remarkably over the last week, gaining nearly 500 subs, which is pretty insane. And I would like to continue to produce more material for you guys. So if you want to be in on that, go down and hit that subscribe button. Well, let's go ahead and start off with the feats. And mostly we have some name changes, but we did get a significant number of new feats. First of all, the feats 1,000 Faces has just been changed to Anthropomorphic Shape. I think that makes sense. And I do believe D&D has 1,000 Faces style of feat, or they did at some point. So a name change was in order, and I think Anthropomorphic Shape honestly just makes more sense, as before 1,000 Faces gave you humanoid form, and it still gives you humanoid form, but the implication of Anthropomorphic Shape means person shaped rather than many different faces. So I think the naming convention works better. Overall, not anything different, but a naming convention that I overall agree with. Another name change, we now no longer have Woodland Stride, we now have Forest Passage. Again, nothing really changed other than the name, and this one's mostly an OGL thing. They just are calling it by a different name, so, it is what it is, but we did get a name change on that at least. Okay, Storm Order actually gained access to a new feat. This one is a spell shape called Snowdrift Spell. And what it does is that when you cast a spell that either has the water, cold, or air traits, and doesn't also have the fire trait, which is very important, you essentially create snow on the creature. So essentially what happens is any square under and adjacent to, so the creature square gets filled, and then all adjacent squares get filled with snow. And this snow just is difficult terrain, it's ankle deep. They can remove the snow from an area with an action, But overall, this essentially just makes it like the effects of criticalling on a Ray of Frost, where the enemy, if they want to go anywhere, has a -10 to their speed, because I guess it's actually more accurate to say at -5 to their speed, because they need to move into difficult terrain to get out of it unless they leap or something like that. So, Snowdrift spell, honestly, not too terrible. I do like it for just an additional thing to just make an enemy have to expend a different action or to slow down potentially more fast enemies. It's really good. This can also just create areas that it creates more zones of difficult terrain. And if you have a team that's really good with dealing with difficult terrain, this is also really good. Now, the difficult terrain only lasts until the beginning of your next turn. And a creature can, of course, clear these squares, as I mentioned before. It can also just be melted if ever exposed to the fire effect. But, I think this is good. And it's what's even funnier is when you use this on large creatures, because it's just adjacency and what's under the creature. So the bigger the creature, technically, the more snow is created by this spell, which I think is kind of fun. All right, at 6th level, Leaf Order got a new feat. This one is called Groan of Oak, and essentially what it is you can cast Oaken Resilience, which, if I'm not mistaken, is Bark Skin, at will as an innate primal spell with a spell rank 1 lower than the highest rank of spells you can cast. The spell targets you as well as your Leshy Familiar if it's within 30 feet of you. Now, I think this has come up with feats prior, but this seems like you just get infinite Bark Skin, essentially. Now, it's 1 higher than your highest ranked spell, sure, but it's not limited by times a day. And I'm sure plenty of people will jump into the comments and say, well, if it's not listed, it's automatically considered once per day. But I don't know exactly if that's the case. Usually there's a limit here on it, and I'm not seeing it. Now, is Barkskin like such a good spell that making it unlimited is broken? No, not necessarily. But still, and again, I don't exactly know what Oaken Resilience is. You know what? Actually, let me figure that out. So I guess a brief preview of the spell increases. Yeah, it's essentially Bark Skin. Target gains 2 resistance to bludgeoning and piercing damage and weakness to fire. It's exactly Bark Skin. So yeah, it's Bark Skin, and it only heightens every every even spell rank at this point. So honestly, there's a good chance that you're just not going to be using the highest level. The resistance is honestly not too much, and it's only to bludgeoning and piercing damage. So that being the case, honestly, if it's infinite, I think it's fine. And it only works on you and your Leshy anyway. And if you, unless you're playing a tank style Druid, you're probably not going to be getting hit all that often anyway as a caster. So yeah, honestly, it's fun. It's really cool for the Leaf Order. Adds a little bit more durableness, which I'm super okay with. And overall, just a good buff to the Leaf Order. All right, a not necessarily animal order, but technically an animal order buff. This goes to Animal Companion. So if you're a Druid with an Animal Companion, you get Instinctive Support also at level 6. It's a free action, and the trigger is you cast a non-cantrip spell that targets only your Animal Companion. So when you do so, after the spell takes place, your companion gains its actions for that turn as if you had commanded it, and one of the actions must be support. If the companion has used any other actions already, it can't support you as normal. So that being the case, this is very niche, I would say. Most animal companions, in my opinion, don't have many support actions that can really benefit casters. But if it's a mount one, there's a lot of really good mount-based support abilities. And yeah, so overall, I think Instinctive Support is pretty okay. It's a fun one for your animal companion, sure, and it has some action efficiency if you're using spells on your animal companion. I don't know how often this will come up to people. So if you are a animal order druid or any druid that has had an animal companion, let me know in the comments, how often do you guys use buffs or heals on your animal companion? Healing was probably be the number one thing I can imagine this really benefits from. And would this be helpful to you all? Because honestly, I don't see the support abilities of most animal companions being overly that helpful, but I don't know. Maybe there's some synergy here that I'm not seeing. Regardless, it's just a new feat, so if anything, it's considered a buff just for lack of, if it wasn't there, then Animal Order wouldn't have gotten anything. So yeah. Another new Leaf Order feat actually found at level 8. Leaf Order is getting a lot of good feats in this one, and this is actually a really solid one. It's a singular action, and you can only use this once per day, but you essentially request from all the nearby plants and general like plant life to give you their energy, more or less. You regain a focus point and 4d8 hit points. Now, you do have to be in a location of at least 15 square feet with healthy plant life, though this can just be grass, lichen, seaweed, or any other naturally occurring forms of flora. Using flora restoration on a given section of nature does not harm it, but it does prevent that section of nature from giving its vitality or to another use of flora restoration for 24 hours. At 9th level and every 2 levels after that, increase the healing by a d8. So overall, it's essentially like a free focus spell you can use once per day that gives you a bunch of healing and actually restores one of your focus points, which is pretty cool, in all honesty. And I don't think the restriction of no single patches can be done by multiple druids. Like, unless your party has a lot of druids in it, all of them also Leaf Order, I don't feel like that particular restriction is going to come up all too much. So this is just an easy, like, in combat, you are in a natural environment, bam, get a bunch of HP, bam, get a focus point back. For a singular action, it's a pretty good feat, in my opinion. It's really, really solid. Next, also at level 8, is Raise Menhir. Now, this is actually one of my favorite ones because I enjoy the idea behind it, but you create a little like totem. It calls it a monument here, and this little monument is created on a unoccupied square within 30 feet of your character, and it makes that square in particular difficult terrain. Then you choose a spellcasting tradition, either arcane, divine, or occult. You cannot choose primal with this. That's important to mention. And all creatures within 15 feet of this monument gain a +2 status bonus to their saves against effects with that trait. The monument lasts for 1 round before crumbling back into the earth or wilting away, but you can sustain it for up to 1 minute. So essentially another free spell added to your spell list that you can use once per hour rather than once per day. And it gives extra like resistance against traditions. Now, because it specifies traditions and it's not mentioning spells, just any effects with that trait, I wonder if this is going to have interesting interactions with the new dragons coming out in the Monster Core, which is going to be releasing next March. Because if you're unaware, the new dragons coming out are going to be, some of them anyway, are going to be based on the spellcasting tradition. So does that give their actions that tradition trait? And if it does, Raise Menhir might actually be very solid with dealing with dragons, which I think is really cool. I like the totem kind of aesthetic, and this is the only totem-like ability that druids get. And honestly, I've really seen in most TTRPGs, honestly. So that being the case, Raise Menhir gets a big thumbs up for me. I think this one's really cool. And it creates a nice safe zone if you have an enemy caster that's not a primal one anyway. So yeah, I really, really like this feat. All right, now this is another really interesting feat. Primal Howl, this requires you have an incredible companion. So technically a buff to the animal order, technically speaking, but only if you're investing in your animal companion. And it's really cool because it gives your animal companion a new advanced maneuver, which is called Primal Howl. What it does is once per hour, it says your familiar screeches and howls. That's not what this, that is an error here. It's not your familiar, it's a companion. So it should say your companion screeches and howls empowered with natural magic. All creatures in a 30-foot cone take 1d6 sonic damage for every 2 levels your companion has, with a basic fortitude save against your spell DC. Creatures that fail become frightened 1, and creatures that crit fail are frightened 2. This fright is an emotion, fear, and mental effect. So overall, a really cool advanced maneuver to add to your animal companion. We did find a little bit of a flub up saying familiar rather than companion here, but overall really good. If you're very much into your animal companion, this is a really good feat to pick up. And this helps, I think, differentiate druids, animal companions a bit more from like Ranger's animal companions, because Ranger and Druid are kind of two different classes that kind of fight over animal companion superiority. Rangers being able to give their hunter's edge to their animal companions, while Druids getting access to more unique animal companions, and now having some new features being added to them, similarly to instinctive support. So overall, I thoroughly enjoy this. I really like this particular feat. And because it essentially is a new advanced maneuver for your animal companion, the 2 actions is actually just 1 action for your character because it's part of the command an animal action. So that being the case, a very solid 1 action essentially effect you can gain. And it does sonic damage, which is one of the lesser resisted damages in the game, which is also pretty cool. It also does frightened on failure. So this is a very powerful ability for your companion to have. So another Storm Order one, also here at level 10, along with Primal Howl, is Thunderclap spell. It's a singular action spell shape that you can add onto your spells. I do like that Storm Order is getting a lot more spell shapes, being one of the orders that you are more focused on spell casting, especially since it's more like offensively focused. So I think this is a really good increase. So if your next action is to cast a spell that has the electricity trait or deals electricity, which are there spells that have the electricity trait or that deal electricity damage that don't have the electricity trait? I don't know. That's very interesting. Has no duration and requires a creature to attempt a saving throw. The force of the spell's lightning creates a thunderclap. In addition to its other effects, each creature that failed its reflex save against the spell is deafened 1 for a round, and those who critically failed are also knocked prone. So this is an interesting part, though, because it says, and requires a creature to attempt a saving throw. But then it says each creature that failed its reflex save against the spell is deafened. So if the save is not a reflex-based save, does that mean they need to also roll reflex? Do they need to roll reflex twice? I think this is another error, if I'm mistaken. I think the intent is it's the same save. So fortitude, reflex, maybe, well, I don't know, there's many will-based electricity saves, but fortitude or reflex, I think I would run it. It's just if the enemy fails, they also are deafened 1 for a round, and if they critically fail, they're knocked prone. Mostly just to make this easier, not to force additional rolls, which I think are unnecessary. But I don't know. It's worded weirdly, as it just says attempt a saving throw. Doesn't specify reflex. So it's either demanding an additional reflex saving throw, or it's only for reflex saving throw spells, which I don't think is the case. In any regard, I think this spell shape is good. And honestly, even if it was just if the enemy failed to save, they get an additional effect, I think is fine, because deafen 1 is not terrible. I can't really think of many situations where being deafened for a round really made a huge difference. Honestly, Thunderclap spell only really benefits you when the enemy crit fails your spell save. So I don't know. I think this one has potential to be good. I think there's ways this one can be interesting. But I also don't see a lot of situations where just the deafened effect is going to be that helpful. So I guess, and I don't know, maybe someone has a very interesting combo for this one. Who knows? All right, another new plant order. Is there? Wait. I think, if I'm not mistaken, 1 second here. Do we have another flub? We do. There's no plant order. It's leaf order. So another. Whoever was doing Druid was not checking over their material. Druid must have come out last, and it feels a little rushed just from all these small errors that we're finding. So yeah, a leaf order spell shape now at level 12 called Garland Spell. This one is if your next action is to cast a spell with either the fungus or plant trait, a garland of plants grows in a 10-foot burst in the spell's range. The plants are difficult terrain and hazardous terrain, covered in your choice of either thorns or poisonous vines. Any creatures that move into one of these squares or end its turn in one takes 2d6 damage, piercing or poison, and a creature can take this damage only once per turn. You and your familiar are immune to this damage. The plants last for 1 minute or until you cast another Garland spell, whichever comes first, and it heightens as this increases to 3d6 at 16th level and 46 at 12th level or 20th level. So that being the case, this is a really good one. There's a lot of like entangle spells or everything that this creates a burst around the enemy. So not only are you trying to restrain the enemy, but you also are creating difficult terrain and hazardous terrain, which is gonna force the enemy to leap, honestly. The enemy is gonna have to leap out of the area if they even can. So Garland Spell, I think, is a very solid choice if you're a leaf order druid and you're using a lot of, plant and fungus spells, which honestly, I don't know why not. I do wish this would also affect minions you have, because I can definitely see summoning a plant or fungus creature and creating this zone would be very beneficial to your team. But that's not quite how it works. So yeah, Garland Spell I think overall is pretty good. All right, also at level 12 here, like many other casters, the Focus feat at level 12, this one is Primal Focus, now gives you all your focus points back rather than just 2. So an overall improvement. That does mean that the, Primal Focus, which you picked up at 18, has been removed as there's no longer a need for it. So that being the case, a overall buff to the feat. And we do have to backtrack a little bit because I missed this in my notes, but I realized as I was going back through things. Green Empathy, the level 6 Leaf Order feat, has been removed, obviously, because we have Plant Empathy now that you can select at level 2, right? Level 2 or level 1. I don't think it really matters either way. So, honestly, it's just you have the effect of a spell all the time, so just kind of remove that. You don't get the bonus to make requests anymore, which you don't get for Animal Empathy either. But I think overall, it's not a big deal. I don't think players were like, plants and animals don't typically have very high DCs to convince them to do things anyway. So the +2 circumstance bonuses to, make a request checks, I don't think ever really came in. And the reason why I actually got reminded of this is because the level 12 feat Green Tongue also got removed. And Green Tongue was just a feat that really didn't do anything because essentially it did the same thing as Green Empathy, only it let your Leshy Familiar also do it. And it was a feat that just wasn't very handy. Because if we read Green Empathy again here real quick, it says you can communicate with plants on a basic level and use diplomacy to make an impression on them. Non-creature plants typically can't fulfill most requests you might ask of them unless you have access to other magic such as speak with plants, which I think is just silly because, again, when has that ever been super helpful? And Green Tongue just essentially gave you the effects of speak with plants at all times, which just seemed like a whole bunch. It seemed like a feat line that just didn't really help because most plants can't really do things for you, even with plant speak anyway. So, or speak with plants. So that being the case, both of these got removed, and I figured I'd just make mention of it, especially because it's something that, I don't know, maybe some of you selected out there, and plus this is a list of changes, and these are changes. So yeah, two feat removed technically here on the list. All right, so now that we're done with the feats, let's go ahead and talk about the changes to the focus spells, which there actually isn't a lot. We're going to start off here first with Primal Summons. The level 6, or technically spell rank 6 focus spell. Pretty much picked it up around level 12. And essentially, the only change to this one is now metal and wood have been added to the Primal Summon edition. So now with metal creatures, the creature strikes deal 1d6 extra electricity damage, and it gains 5 resistance to electricity. And wood, the creatures gain a climb speed of 30 feet and resistance +2 to bludgeoning and piercing. So yeah, extra things you can summon with the new summoning spells added to the game. Overall, any improvements, and yeah, just an addition because of Rage of Elements, which just makes sense. I already mentioned Cornucopia, which is just good berry, but now you no longer need to have a berry on hand, which honestly, that was the hardest part about good berry. It's just, how do you have berries on you all the time? And berries go bad, honestly, really fast after you pluck them. So, it's like, unless you have a whole grapevine in your backpack, it was very annoying to try to justify. And most people just ignored the berry thing anyway, or GMs just hand wave and say, you find a berry somewhere. So Cornucopia just fixing that problem was honestly very good. So yeah, another change that honestly a lot of people liked. And the last change was Impaling Briars became a 3-action focus spell rather than a 2-action focus spell. A surprising nerf in the list of overall buffs to Druid. I was going to say Ranger for a second there. But this one I think makes a ton of sense, mostly because Impaling Briars is insanely strong and it's not really diminished in strength with the additional action thrown on here. The biggest one is Impede. Creating a 100-foot emanation of impeding briars is nuts. Difficult terrain in a 100-foot emanation is really good. Like ground within 100-foot emanation, so all ground. Like it's such a powerful ability. So it being 3 actions to kind of help balance it a little bit, I think only makes sense, honestly. I don't think anyone's gonna really fuss over it too much. And, as we saw with some of the other Druid stuff as well, this also could just be an error, honestly. I don't know. That's the problem with some of the errors I found here in Druid, is I can't tell if Impaling Briars was balanced to 3 actions or mistakenly put at 3 actions because, it wasn't before. Who knows? I don't. I think 3 actions is completely fair for the effects of Impaling Briars anyway. So I'll be using it this way unless corrected otherwise. But, as far as I know, this is the new intent. But, as we said before, Druid was kind of rushed a little bit in my opinion. And that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully y'all enjoyed and hopefully this was all very informative to you. This is the last class that we had to do. I wanted to do. And I'm overall pretty excited for most of the changes. Most of the classes came out really good from the remaster. There were some things that were lost, but some of that might come back in Player Core 2, which I will be covering. And I hope this information was very helpful for you, seeing as the stuff that, you guys care about, obviously, your characters and what changes happen to your, classes or the like. So that being the case, hope you enjoyed. Tomorrow, I'm going to do cantrip changes. So all cantrip changes from the core book and advanced player's guide to the remaster. It's probably going to be a rather intensive video. I would like to do more spell ranks at once, and we'll see. It's going to be a lot of time to review every spell and to verify whether they're all, like change or different. And I know cantrips got a lot of differences in the remaster, so I'm just going to dedicate a whole video to cantrips, and then we'll go from there based on how much has changed for each individual spell rank. So if you want to see that, I recommend subscribing. And if you don't want to miss any of my videos, you can go down into the description where we have our official Discord, where we have over 200 members. And as well, anytime a new video comes out or whenever we go live, you guys get a notification. So that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.